Hello fellow gamers and welcome back. I'm as always Captain Sedaris.
And here's a well-fed 7 Saturn.
And I am Istalri Skolir.
Hi and welcome to our little corner of the internet. Before we start with the main topic, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm John, also known as Istalri Skolir. By day, I am a junior software developer, but in the evenings I do a fair bit of gaming, game development. I also stream to Twitch, mainly focusing on Dungeon Keeper and the Keeper Effects community mod. I've been streaming that for about a year now, and slowly build a bit of gathering and just enjoying being part of the whole Keeper FX community.
And how did you get into Dungeon Keeper?
It was a game that I had as a youngest child. I can't remember how old I was when I first started playing, but it was a disc that I got from my dad. I just played it a lot, absolutely loved it. And then when I started streaming it about a year ago now, I found out about the community mod Keeper FX. And I've just dove straight in, started streaming more of the community mod, meeting new people, and took part in things like speedrunning and such. So I've been playing the base game for 15, 16 years and the Keeper FX mod for about a year now.
Oh, that's quite a long time.
Just a little bit.
But it just shows how nice this game actually is.
Yeah. The base game does have a few issues from its release, but the community mod kind of fixes a lot of the bugs and that are in the base game.
So I guess we all nearly bought it at the release.
I don't know, because I was actually born the same year as it was released. So my dad would have picked it up sometime, and as I said, I can't remember how young I was when I first started playing it. It would have been pretty young, but yeah. As soon as I was old enough to basically know how to handle a mouse, I was playing this game.
And you, Saturn?
I suppose it must have been somewhere around 2000, 2001, maybe. It cannot be before 1999 because this was the first time I had a computer that could run that stuff. But I believe pretty soon I had this game and actually don't know where from actually. Funny thing is, in the beginning I wasn't too attracted to it, but it didn't take long to get the good feeling of the game. I believe the most strange part was finding out how to control a unit by yourself and thinking, what's the point? But after a while you get the hang of it, and yeah, been stuck there ever since. Every now and then I pull it out of the archive and play it.
Pull it out of the dusty cabinet.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I believe last time I had it was half a year ago, and I was trying to create a sort of portable version of it, because nowadays you, of course, can play it in DOSBox, don't have to run it in DOS. And yeah, you can make it a portable installation this way.
Yeah, the game has a lot of replayability. You can keep going back to it, especially when you start getting into a mod which has a lot of new campaigns in that. I know that when I found out about the mod, I was originally told of it after I've been streaming for a short while. The base game only has one campaign in it that's about 20 levels plus some secret levels. The mod introduces loads of new community campaigns in there, and some are longer, some are shorter. There are also some other single levels you can play, along with just other bits of new content you can play with.
Good, then I would say let's start with this review. The game is from 1997. In it you manage the creation of a dungeon and command your army of minions. To play this game under Windows 10, I would really recommend to get the GOG version and use the Keeper FX mod, as you already mentioned. That way you not only get widescreen support, but also bug fixes, multiplayer support, and the best thing, additional campaigns. As always, a good place to find another player is the community Discord of Dungeon Keeper. Maybe our guest could tell us a little bit about the community, since you are a part of it basically.
Yeah, so the main place to hang out for a lot of Keeper fans would be the Keeper Clan Discord. It's a pretty active Discord that's got the devs in who are still working on the mod, because they're still working on various new features and stuff. It's got some of those streamers in it. There's a few speedrunners, again, like myself, a few others. It's a really active community, and there's always people in there who are more than happy to suggest new campaigns for you to give a go. If you're stuck on certain levels, people give you a hand. There's always chats about what could be like maybe tweaks of trying to help make the game a little bit more fun and so on. The devs also do sometimes accept like community feedback on some of the changes they made to the game, which is great to see. One example of that would be one of the devs actually has developed a timer for some of the speedrunners so that we have an inbuilt timer for the game when we speedrun.
In general, I was surprised to hear that there's actually an active community out there, because for those of you who don't know the game, in the beginning it of course had a multiplayer, but only via IPX, kind of TCP/IP but older, and isn't being routed over the internet. So today's games wouldn't be possible with IPX anymore. And I was really surprised to hear that there's an active community, because actually you wouldn't be able to play multiplayer with the vanilla game. So how did that work out?
Unfortunately, the multiplayer is one of the few sticking points. Obviously, as you say, IPX isn't used anymore, and the base game doesn't use TCP/IP, which is what more modern connections use. So the FX devs are working on that, and there is a working multiplayer. Well, I say working. There is a multiplayer connection you can use. However, it's very unreliable at the moment. And the first guy who was working on it kind of stopped working on it. But one of the other devs has recently picked it up, and hopefully in time he'll be able to finish updating it so that we can all play multiplayer again with a more reliable connection. As at the moment, unless you have a very low ping, the game will crash on you. But a lot of us are really hoping that he is able to finish that somewhat soon, because that would be a major addition into the game.
Oh yeah. Apparently you're thriving on single player mostly. How does that work? I mean, there are a lot of games out there who actually are multiplayer capable, and the community has a little bit rusted. In your case, it seems to be thriving. So what's the difference? What are you doing so well?
I would think part of it might be to do with it. It is a little bit of a more niche game compared to some. There aren't a lot of godlike games out there, but I would say a lot of it does really come down to having an active community, some great devs who do actively keep working on it and take community feedback. So along with the game's charms, there's a lot of people that really love it, and I'm not the only person that streams it. There have been other people who stream it and do speed runs, and there's a lot of the other campaigns that are in the FX mod are community made. You can go and talk to sort of campaign makers. There's tools out there that let you make your own campaigns and such without too much hassle. So I would say while at the moment it doesn't have multiplayer, it kind of still has a lot of ways that a community can interact and talk to each other, whether it's through streaming, sharing campaigns, and just helping each other through, like if you're stuck on a certain campaign or a certain level. There's still a lot of ways that people can interact with each other through this game, which is what I would think is what's helping the community to grow.
A quick note from the chat, KeeperFX has TCP/IP support, but you need a rock solid low latency connection at the moment. So a LAN connection would be recommended.
Yeah, this is pretty much what I used a few years ago. I mean, KeeperFX wasn't actually completely new to me, but the last time I used it, or I tried it with a friend, it did work until the point when one of the AIs was being defeated and the game was over because it crashed. So yeah, but we were really into this because, well, playing the game in multiplayer was always something we wanted to do. And in the old days, when we were actually doing LAN parties on Windows XP, the IPX connection was still possible, and you could work with that stuff natively. But then again, it was really slow. If you had 4 players, and all of a sudden the game turned really, really slow, so we never really did it. And this is something I was missing, kind of, because the game mechanics actually really makes you want to play it in multiplayer. And now we have the possibility, and yeah, I'd really love to see some progress there. That would really spice up things.
Yeah, and one of the other things that KeeperFX does over the base game, which is like a massive boost, is that the base game, even on modern machines, can still be a little bit laggy, as it wasn't great optimization wise. But one of the big features that the devs did for KeeperFX was they added a lot of optimization to it. So even when you're playing in higher resolutions, which on the base game could really cause some lag issues, you can now play it utterly smoothly. And as you say, the mechanics and the styling of the game is something that you just want to keep playing. One of the things that I really like about it, and I think a lot of people in the community share these thoughts, is the game's got a lot of charm to it, and it's that charm and all the expansive mechanics in for what is a pretty old game, and really add to the experience of playing it.
And while we're at it, I believe one of the big success points of the game, I don't know if you are already in the pro segment, one of the really big points, I believe, is the details in the game. I mean, it's stuff like, the Hellhound is peeing on corpses and stuff like that, or the Dark Mistress as an idea is just awesome. And I believe that this really is one of the big reasons why the game is so popular still, because they had really, really nice ideas, well executed. And this is one of the reasons why I'm always coming back to the game. The game mechanics is somehow just fine, just okay, and the game is well designed from a artwork point, I believe.
Yeah, there's a lot to the game to really like, and they did add a lot of features. Unfortunately, in the base game when they first made it, you could say they bit off a little more than they could chew, as there were a lot of features that were half finished or stripped because of time or didn't work. And certain features like ghosts, for example, are a creature that you get when a creature dies in the torture room. They come back as a ghost. They are meant to be able to pass through doors as if they're not there. However, in the base game, this functionality didn't work. Stuff like that has been fixed in Keeper Effects, and as you say, it really adds to the game's feel. It was just one of those when the game was first released, it might have been a bit too much, but because people are still working on it and the devs are fixing some of these initial ideas that either didn't work or were a little bit buggy, you're really able to see the true dream of what Bullfrog and Peter Molyneux were really trying to make at the time, along with some of the more, I don't necessarily want to say modern ones, but what people also want to see. As I've said before, the community devs are still working on it, and they take feedback from people, and so they'll build in things that they think work well for people or that people want to see.
Before we go any further, I would say let's make a quick look at my notes for the history segment, since we're already so deep in the history of the game, and then we can move on to the pros. For this look at the history of the game, I talked with Dean Carter, one of the developers of the game, and a community member called Your Master. Links to those transcripts are in the description below. Here just a short summary. The game was developed by Bullfrog and released after a development time of 18 months. During the development, the team had as inspiration the classic D&D games, and for the game engine they used an adapted version of the game High Octane from the year 1995. The programming language for the game was C. Not unusual for games in the late 90s, it was released for DOS and Windows. Since more and more developers back in those days switched to the Windows systems, which for me as a non-programmer, non-software engineer, I can't imagine how hard it must be to work 50% in DOS time and then 50% in Windows. Maybe Saturn, you can comment to that something?
Well, for starters, DOS is 16-bit, Windows at least 95 was 32-bit. So yeah, there's a lot of difference actually. But if you have written your base engine from scratch anyways, then I believe it's not too hard to adapt it if you have done it in a technically proper way. But then again, I never really developed games for DOS or Windows, so this is just wild guessing.
So you wouldn't say it's a world changer?
I believe it's actually funny because you would have to maintain both. You would have to maintain the DOS version and the Windows version. Both will have to work in the end, because otherwise you wouldn't gain anything from it. So why invest the effort? So you will have to do it both properly, and yeah, it's a lot of effort on top, I believe. But as you said, it wasn't too uncommon back then. I mean, there are other games like Ignition and stuff like that did it the very same way. You have a DOS version, you have a Windows version, and for me personally, I rarely use the DOS version up to where I try to put it into DOSBox, and The only thing that really bugs me is that I still don't know when the game is trying to use the low resolution version and when it does switch to high resolution. I still haven't got any idea because I know both work in DOSBox. I've seen both and I don't know what I'm doing differently when I'm installing them.
I believe there's a shortcut you can use to help you with the resolutions. I believe it's Alt-R. I'd have to double check on my own version, but I believe if you use Alt-R, it lets you hot swap between the resolutions in both the base game and the Keeper FX mod.
Yeah, I will try that. But this is really strange because you install the game and sometimes you have high resolution, sometimes you have low resolution, and I still don't know what I'm doing differently there. But yeah, as long as it works, I'm just happy.
Like with most releases, some features could sadly not be included into the final version. The developer, Dean Carter, told me that they wanted to include the ability to fill up holes, which just led to many crashes. And for time reasons, they couldn't include a hero versus keeper mode, which I would really like to play.
Switching sides.
Yeah.
There is actually a campaign in Keeper FX that's called Revenge of the Lord. In that campaign, you actually play as the heroes and play against keepers. I only recently did that campaign myself. I will say it's a lot of fun. However, it is definitely one of the harder campaigns out there. While I would 100% recommend the campaign, I would suggest that any newer players to the game maybe get a little more experience in some of the easier campaigns and work up to Revenge of the Lord.
Maybe a quick question about that specific topic. Something I was never sure about in the game. There are missions where you have a white opponent with a white dungeon heart, but I never really was sure about whether this is actually really the good side or just another keeper. Because he has a dungeon heart and you can defeat him by killing that dungeon heart. So I would guess it would be a dungeon keeper, but I never was sure.
So getting into the mechanics of the game a little bit, all players as the heroes are still seen as a player, all the players are each assigned their own number and each assigned their own colour. Technically, depending on the creature pool available, a keeper can still attract heroes. So as such, heroes can also have their own heart. It is technically the heart for the dungeon, but it is the hero's heart. So why in this instance is no different to, say, a green dungeon keeper or a blue dungeon keeper in terms of the programmatical mechanics of the game. In the story-wise, though, I wouldn't be sure on the exact reasons, but yeah, the heroes would have a heart that they need to defend. I would guess it would, lore-wise, you could spin it as to be the heart powers their gate entrance into the underworld, but that would be a bit of a guess on my part. Lubinix or your master would be a better person ask that question, I'm afraid.
Never mind, that's quite alright.
Just some information about the Keeper FX mod. The mod was created around 2008, if my research is correct, by a guy called Mephisto. After a few years, he had some large changes in his personal and professional life, which sadly caused him to stop working on the project. But before he left the community, a fellow member called Your Master helped him with testing of new features, and that led that basically he took over the scepter and continued his work as a, I would say, project lead now. Even so, he isn't a programmer.
He kind of takes the lead on a lot of it now. I believe he is open to others helping out. As I said, there are a number of other developers. I believe a couple of them are in the chat at the moment. At one point, he sent me a link because, as I said, I do software dev myself. I was going to look into it. However, unfortunately, I do not have time to help out with that as much as I would love to. But Lubinix / Your Master, he has a different name depending on what platform. He does kind of take the overall lead on it, and he's really quite passionate about the game and does a lot to try and continue and push the development of it.
So, since we already mentioned the pro section, I would say let's go there. Who wants to start?
So, the great thing about Dungeon Keeper, I would say, is definitely the community side of it. The community, and as part of that, the community mod FX adds a lot of new content to the game. It has a very active player base for people who do a lot of different things in it, whether they're making new campaigns, whether they're speedrunning the classic, whether they're like suggesting edits for the developers or whatever. As such, it really kind of builds not just the game but the community itself, which is really active, which is great to see for a game that's around 20, just short of 25 years old now, I believe.
It's interesting. We have now, I guess, roughly 10 to 14 reviews, and you are the first one who ever mentioned that the best part is the community. I really like that.
This one's a little bit more of a personal view than an objective review, but at the end of the day, games are meant to be played for fun. And part of that fun is sharing that with other people. It's actually part of the reason why I stream myself. While there isn't multiplayer, there is multiplayer, but there's not massively reliable multiplayer at the moment, there's still a lot of other ways you can share games with each other, whether it's community content, whether it's streaming, speed running, and a lot of people still like help each other out. What my favorite bits about streaming myself is sharing my experiences in the game with those people who come to watch me, and that for me is just as much fun as the game itself. The game is still really important and it's a great game, but I would say for this would apply to most games, or I feel like it should. The community should be just as important as the game itself.
Definitely. We mentioned it many times before. Community and mods, well, they keep the games alive.
They really do. I could not agree more. Okay, so as I said earlier, there's not many godlike games out there. There's a lot less godlikes than other genres such as RTSs or RPGs. And something like this is a great example of one. It's unique, it's got a little bit of dark humor, it's got a real charm to it. Even down to like the intro cinematics or the outro cinematics when you complete the classic campaign, just really kind of add to the whole you're there to be bad, it's good to be bad. And while it's kind of cheesy by today's standards, it's still just really great and almost therapeutic to be able to just be evil in a game that encourages you to be evil. And you can just have a real laugh over it, whether you're slapping your minions, whether you're possessing someone and getting them to go fight someone, whether you're just like taking control of warlocks or vampires or having to split your creatures up. It's just a really unique game with a lot of ideas behind it. Other pros, I would say, would probably be the speedrunning and Twitch side. Obviously, it's still a bit, as I said earlier, a bit of a niche game, so it's not going to have thousands of people streaming it like something like PUBG or something like that. But it still has, for what it is, quite a few of us who stream it. Some of us also speedrun. There's 5 of us up on speedrun.com who have done full game speedruns. There are also a few other people who have done individual level speedruns. There's a lot of different aspects to this game, and the game kind of encourages you to play different ways, try different play styles, talk to people and get new ideas. There's a lot of almost hidden mechanics that you might not be aware of when you just play through it, but when you really get into the nitty-gritty of the game, you start to learn new little tricks, such as being able to use the wind ability to blow creatures through 2 walls that are at a corner to corner, or possessing a dragon and using the fire breath, which is several times more powerful than just using the normal. And it's learning these new little things that mean you're constantly like learning, adapting your play style in the game.
I always took this as a bug, actually. I'm not sure if this is true, because what you just described with the thing with the dragon, this is something I also noticed. And I believe the problem is that the dragon does not have any cooldown for his fire. When he's using it by itself, he has a cooldown. And if you're using him while directly controlling it, then it just constantly fires. And this is why it gets so intensely powerful. I'm not sure if this is a bug, but I suppose so.
It was originally a bug. So as you said, when you're out of possession of dragons, normally, There's no cooldown on the flame breath. There is a cooldown, sorry. So that means that it works as intended. But when you're in possession for whatever reason, there's no cooldown, which means that the flame breath is going as fast as what your computer can handle, as fast as the game can handle. This means that even the lowest level dragons can just melt even like the strongest of creatures. The devs have nerfed it a little bit. It's somewhat fixed in the newer versions of Keeper FX. From 0.4.7 onwards, I believe. It is not completely nerfed, it is still a lot more powerful, but it doesn't completely melt everything as quickly as what it used to. But as a fun little side note, that bug with the flame breath is actually one of the big bugs that a lot of speedrunners like myself use when we try and speedrun the classic campaign with classic bugs enabled.
Do you know what the current record is? Just curious.
The current record is held by BNDR, I believe, at about 2 hours 20, something like
Fuck.
that. It is really quite quick. I can't remember what second place is. Third place is, I think it was something like 2.75 hours or something like that. 2 hours 40. I know it's about 40 minutes faster than my time, which is currently in fourth place at 3 hours 15. I remember being a little upset because my time was actually in first place for a whole 12 hours. And then Ginger Nat actually beat my time less than 12 hours after it officially got accepted. Which, fair play to him, he did do it really well. I was just a little upset that my time did not even stand for 12 hours.
For those of you out there who don't know the game, you can easily take 2 or 3 hours for one mission if you take your time. So, yeah, that's actually awesome.
Yeah, the thing with the speedrun is it really, I don't want to say requires anything, but it helps if you start to know some of the more nitty-gritty details of the game, like where some of the magic boxes are, transferring certain creatures, and knowing certain weaknesses at certain points that you can take advantage of.
And of course, I take it you do not use the speed up function of the game. It's always same speed.
No, we don't use the frame skip function. It is something that's been mentioned in the community Discord in Keeper Clan. So BNDR, who's the moderator as well, he talks to us who speedrun, and we talk about like the rules and that. Being a bit of a smaller community, we all kind of get to a bit of a say in how we like to do the speedruns. Currently, we don't allow the frame skip. But one thing that was being discussed at one point, and I can't remember if this is going to come into fruition at all, I would have to check with the others, was the timer that I mentioned earlier would track if you use the frame skip function. So this would allow people to use the frame skip function, but their end time would still count up how long it would have taken them if they hadn't used the frame skip function.
So they're actually
the
saving real time and still do the same as if they weren't.
Yeah, so you could play for say 2 hours, but your end time might still be 4 hours if you had played without frame skip. Currently it's not the case, but it was something that was being discussed at one point, so that may come around at a later date.
Saturn, you want to continue?
Sure. Unless you have left, of course.
No, I've not really got many pros left. I think I've said my piece.
All right. I believe the biggest pro actually is the entire game design. In its details, the ideas, there's very little in the game design that I think could have been really better. So it's just the overall experience that makes this game so awesome, I believe. I mean, the game mechanics itself. I mean, you're digging yourself around through the map, yeah? So you actually can decide how your opponents can approach you if you do it properly. You can, of course, harvest resources. In this case, it's gold, and even the actual harvesting of resources may have an impact on your map, because once the gold piece, the gold field is harvested, then it's empty. So it's pretty much like digging a hole. So also this adds on top to the complexity of what we are doing just by simply digging yourself through the walls or through the earth. There are many other strategic games where you just have to take the map for granted the way it is. And in this case, it's not necessarily the case. Of course, all maps have certain features and you have a certain way how to approach them or how not to approach them. But even within those boundaries, you still have a lot of things you can decide how to approach, for example, an enemy. If you are going straight for him and trying to fight your way to his heart, or if you are trying to bunker yourself in. On top, you have the traps, of course. I believe the trap mechanics really makes this game a lot funnier. I mean, indie trap, anyone? The idea, just the idea is cool. Everybody who knows the Indiana Jones movies knows the scene where he's running from a giant rock ball, and they just took the same idea and made it a trap for enemy units. So when the trap is activated, a giant ball of rock is rolling through your dungeon. But then again, keep in mind it's a rolling ball of stone. It can also kill your own unit. So it's not just a no-brainer to place it somewhere and say, yeah, let him come. Because all the while you are working in your own dungeon, you might hurt your own creatures. So you will also have to keep that in mind. So it's not just as easy as, well, place some traps here. So another complexity here, which is carefully executed, I believe. Then, of course, the different creatures. So you have flies, you have bugs, you have skeletons, orcs, trolls, wizards, dragons, and also some creatures that you, I believe, don't find in any other games, like the Bile Demon or the Horny. I believe they are Dungeon Keeper specific. So they didn't just copycat their stuff together, they also had their own ideas here. This really puts in a nice variety. I mean, there are a lot of other games which have a lot of units. Classic is take StarCraft or take Total Annihilation. They have a lot of units. But in this case, units actually are really standing on themselves. It's not that you can interchange them like in other games where you have some sort of artillery unit for every faction. In this case, you really have special units for the bad faction and also for the good faction. You have different kinds of good guys out there. And, well, it's just a whole lot that they placed into this game. And sometimes also in a way that really makes you smile. Like I said, the Dark Mistress. If you have ever seen the Dark Mistress, you know exactly what they are aiming at. And they placed this in a game that I believe is for 12-year-olds or something like that. Probably they wouldn't get the message, but everyone who is an adult knows what they are trying to do there. So, in general, the humor of the game is also cool. It's a similar direction. The texts that the narrator, the guy who tells you the story, is sending you, they are in part really hilarious, you know? And this is what I mean with the game design. It's not just presenting the story, but doing it in a very, very nice way. Carefully designed creature units. The game concept itself is, in my opinion, well thought. And I believe that the entire combination of it just makes this game really adorable. It has
sorry, carry on.
Yeah?
My bad.
No, shoot.
I was just going to say, I had kind of forgot about the creature, taken that for granted. That is definitely one of the best parts. So there was a sequel to Dungeon Keeper 2, which was still a good game, but it wasn't as popular. And one of the main critiques that a lot of people have with it is that the creatures were not as diverse in Dungeon Keeper 2. There are a lot more humanoid. A lot of them were a lot more of the same kind of deal. So there weren't any insects. They're all humanoid. They're all based off the same kind of idea. So the abilities weren't as varied. The creatures weren't as varied. And it just didn't. It wasn't as well designed as the first one. So I would totally agree with you. The creature design is one of the best parts about the game.
Yeah, and as you pointed out, it's not just some generic units like in many other strategic games where the differences aren't really really important. For example, if you take the Bile Demon, it has two really interesting special properties. One is it's a really big, fat, honking creature which is heavy. You cannot blow it away with wind. You cannot. And one of its attacks is, and here I'm getting back at the humor part, it's farting. It puts out poisonous gas and hurts your opponent's units in this fashion. And I believe that's hilarious, you know. How many other games do you know where units have those kinds of special properties? Or, for example, if you put a wizard into the training room, train him up to level 2 or anything above, and you place him back into the library, he will start kicking out other kinds of units from the library. For example, if you put in a horny to keep him silent, all of a sudden he runs out because the wizard is trying to throw fireballs at him. He doesn't want him in the library. So it's those small things where you really see it was carefully thought and carefully executed. It's not just, well, he's a wizard and he casts spells. It's a little bit more complex, and most units really have some sort of specialty. The only thing I believe I never really got was, what are the bugs all about? I mean, the spiders can freeze someone, okay, flies can fly around, but what are the bugs doing? I believe they are just some generic targets. But then again, it's also a variety aspect. All units are kind of special, and this one, well, it's a little bit boring.
As for the bugs, they do actually have a extra use for later on in the game. As well as being a bit of a starting unit, you can sacrifice them in the temple. So all the rooms you can build as the dungeon keeper is a temple, which has a few different uses. Like if your creatures are upset, they'll go to a temple and they'll stop being angry. But you can also sacrifice units there, and certain combinations will give you different bonuses. For example, if you sacrifice imps in the temple, you can spawn more imps for cheaper. If you sacrifice 2 flies or 2 beetles, I always get these ones mixed around. I'll likely get told off about this later on because I'm always being reminded. But one of them will either give you a new manufacture from the workshop, so like whatever
That's
your
the
creatures
bug.
are manufacturing.
That's the bug.
That's it, the bug. Thank you
Yeah,
very
and the
much.
fly
I'm
gives you
always
the fly gives you the research. I know this because the very last research item really takes a lot of time, and I usually keep 2 flies in spare to just skip this very last research item because it really takes a lot of time. This is why I know.
Yeah, the destroy wall spell, the last one, takes
Yeah, this takes
absolutely forever.
ages. Yeah.
Which makes sense because it is the spell that allows you to tear down reinforced walls, which are meant to be a no, you're not coming in here, and you turn around and say, actually, yes, I am. But it is a bit of a pain if you've got no flies or anything and you've got to research it. Even with the strongest units in the game with the highest research skill, it still takes a while to get that final research, as you say.
Yeah, and as you said, the temple gives you different bonuses, but also the opposite. For example, if you throw in a chicken, then all your units, I believe, all your chickens are vanishing.
I believe that's also if you sacrifice a ghost as well, yeah. All your chickens in your hatcheries just literally explode. It's actually really hilarious when you watch it. It's one of those things where you can just keep doing it and it will not stop being funny, even though it is not good for your dungeon.
And while we are at the chicken, again, an awesome idea. I mean, you have to feed your creatures. So it's kind of a supply thing. And if you take chickens, then you can feed your units, but you can also feed units which are in jail because they would be starving and turn into skeletons. You can also take those chickens and place them right on top of creatures which are in the torture chamber, which makes them endure longer. And if you slap them, they just explode once again. So even something as mundane, so to say, like food for your creatures, was turned into a real game mechanic.
As you said earlier, it's these little things that add so much more. Like the mundane food source suddenly has far more uses, even uses that are actually bad, as you say, sacrificing them and getting told off just really adds to the game a whole lot more. These little ideas that just build on the whole environment and experience.
And especially considering that they had 1.5 years. I mean, that's no time for a game. When I heard this the first time, I was really shocked that 1.5 years for this game, with that much of a variety, with that nice of a gameplay. And you can only imagine what would have happened if they had another 1.5 years. It would have been absolutely glorious.
It does really make you wonder what else they would have put in. As already been said, there was a lot of cut content, there was a lot of bugs. I would hope that they would have fixed all the optimization issues, but at the same time, it would have been really interesting to see what else would have been done. Thankfully, we can get to see some of it through Keeper FX, which is brilliant, but at the same time, it does make you wonder what Peter and the other developers on the team would have had in store if they had that extra time to really add everything they wanted.
So I guess you already mentioned everything on my list.
Sorry.
Yeah, I've been playing this stuff a lot too. I've also played this for 20 years or something. So you have to be into the game if you are playing for 20 years. So yeah, I really like this game, and yeah, a lot to say.
I played it also for 20 years on and off, but I guess you are the master between us both. The only thing you didn't mention, which is also a really good pro for me, is the amazing wiki. There is rarely a game with such a detailed wiki. Of course, Elite Force Saturn, your wiki is also amazing, but this blows it sadly out of the water.
It's pale in comparison, yeah. You can really see that are at least a few guys who have really a lot of time and a lot of love for the game, or maybe a lot of people having a lot of time, because this is really nicely done. Yeah, I believe there are a lot of games out there who would really benefit from this kind of commitment as well.
And my last thing you didn't mention is this amazing aspect that you can go inside a creature. The whole of the time you see the world from above, and then with a spell you can go into a creature and see the world from below. How all of your creatures see it. Every time I play this game, it amazes me.
And the funny thing is, I always took it for being a special feature, which was maybe implemented later or something like that. But when you know where the game is actually derived from, well, it's just taking the engine that is capable of that anyway. So it had been there probably right from the start.
But the idea to include it is so rarely used.
Yeah, they used it. This is exactly the point. They didn't just take the engine and make a real-time strategy game out of it, but they also took this ability of the engine that you can see the world in 3D. Again, the game is in 3D. This isn't entirely obvious at the beginning, but actually the game is in 3D.
That is a beautiful feature, and the more you get into a game, the more you realize how big that feature was. When I was younger, I very rarely used it because I wasn't very good at possessing creatures. But as you play it more, it becomes a massively useful thing. Like when you start, it almost becomes its own game in a way. You can almost turn it into an FPS in a sense. So one of the things that I do sometimes to try and get around creatures on guard, if they're on a guard post, if I've got archers, then I will possess archers, and suddenly the game becomes an FPS as I'm running around trying to shoot these creatures while avoiding getting shot myself. Another thing that's really interesting about this, so this was meant to be in the game originally, but it didn't work, it was broken. However, has since been fixed in the Keeper FX mod, was if you had the barracks, you could drop units in the barracks, you could then possess one of the units, and then run off, and all the other creatures in the barracks would follow you in possession. So you could literally form your own gang, and then in possession just go running across the map and just do whatever you want with like a horde of bow demons on your tail. It's absolutely amazing. Like I said, it's broken in the base game, but it was fixed in Keeper FX. I've only done it like twice myself on stream, and oh my god, it is so much fun.
And it also opens possibilities, for example, for speedrunning. There's one mission where you are basically surrounded by lava. Your opponent is as well, and there's almost no walkable ground. It's a mission where all those neutral dragons are running around. And when you came into this mission with your horny from the last mission, then the game is over within minutes.
Yeah.
Just run over and park your horny next to the heart and do whatever you want to do, because you will smash him.
Yeah.
This is another pro for me. This game can be so hard and so easy.
Yeah.
Particularly when you start playing the custom campaigns, like you get some which are really easy, some which are really hard, some which are not necessarily hard but require extensive knowledge about the game. A really good example of that is the Ancient Keeper campaign. I loved playing that. It's not a hard campaign, but you really need to know the little details, how the mechanics work, all these little bugs and features and stuff like that. Because the game requires you to know them. Things like being able to, as I said earlier, use the wind ability to blow creatures through holes in walls. The fact that ghosts can go through doors. The flame breath attack. There's literally a level in there where you start with like a level 1 dragon and you've got a level 10 avatar stuck on a single tile surrounded by lava. And the entire idea of that level is that you possess the dragon, you train the dragon off just fighting the avatar before using the possessed dragon to go and kill all the heroes around the map. And it's little details like that where in that campaign you've got to know all these extensive details to be able to play that campaign. And it's this variety that, again, adds to it all.
Sounds really amazing. I have to play all those custom campaigns.
They are well worth giving a go. They really are.
Well, I have a night shift in 2 days and I hope not many patients, so I will play. But sadly, also this game has a few cons.
Yeah.
I would start with the biggest con for me is sometimes it's hard to find where is the battle. Where is my creature being attacked? I can't find it.
Or especially the wandering itself.
Yeah, the wandering fly.
Of course, there are mechanics that can help you manage your units, like the guard posts and stuff like that. But still, especially when units are coming to your dungeon, sometimes it's really a hassle to manage them. And of course, managing the horny.
Yeah, so creature management, there is a lot of micromanagement in the game. In some ways, there are plenty of tools to allow you to micromanage, but they're not necessarily immediately obvious. And it's another one of those where it can be difficult to figure out or even remember some of the details. For example, with the horny, he does get angry really easily. So if you know what you're doing, he's really easy to maintain. You just don't let him get bored. Always make sure he's always doing something, whether he's in the temple, whether he's training, anything like that. Also make sure that he doesn't get hungry. When you actually know it, it's really easy to handle. If he does get upset, you can cheer him up by just grabbing gold from the gold room and cheer him up. But these are not immediately obvious. There's nothing in the game, and this is one of my cons with it. There's not necessarily things in the game that tells you this. The classic campaign doesn't teach you some of these mechanics. Other campaigns don't make them obvious. A lot of the things that I know about the extra mechanics and that, I know from people telling me when I stream. Before I was streaming, I never used a horny because I didn't know how to maintain him. It was only through people telling me these things that I learned how to maintain him. I know how to deal with him. So while that does add to the community side, it does kind of show a real weakness in the game of how it doesn't always tell you about some of these hidden mechanics. And as I said, some of the campaigns, if you play Ancient Keeper being one in particular, there will be levels where you can easily get stuck having no clue what you're meant to do, because what you are meant to do is such an obscure task that there's no way you would come across it without someone telling you.
Or sometimes it's really, really ugly if you do tiny mistakes, which in most missions won't do anything, and in certain missions don't do it. Just never do it. You will lose the mission this way. And you cannot know in advance. Of course, that's always part of certain single-player games that you learn from experience and try again. But sometimes it's just downright unfair.
Yeah.
Especially if you attack the enemy, you have 8 creatures on your hand, drop them, and 2 decide, no, I'm hungry now, I'm going. I don't care about this battle.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, things like that can be improved with like better management of your dungeon and stuff like that. But these skills can be difficult to get, and as I said, it's not always clear how to approach these without someone telling you. It's definitely a major weakness of the game that you don't know a lot of this stuff. Like, Dungeon Keeper is one of those games where anyone can go into it and get the basic idea within a couple of minutes. Oh, I gather gold, I make a few rooms, I get creatures, kill heroes. Basic idea, really easy to get. But when it comes to really getting into some of the mechanics, it's like, well, okay, how was I meant to know ghosts can go through walls? How was I meant to know that the breath attack in Dragon Possession is overpowered? How am I meant to know that I can blow creatures through walls?
Or that you can prolong the torture experience. You don't have to wait up to the point where your unit turns into a ghost. You can keep it alive. You can even cast a health spell on it. And if you don't try stuff like that, you will never notice.
Exactly. Something like the health spell, you can kind of put together. It's like, okay, I've got a heal spell. That kind of works. But if you're on a level where, say, the heal spell is not available, but you have to capture that unit, which there are some campaigns that use that kind of mechanic, you just sit there thinking, well, how am I meant to heal them? They're just going to die and turn into a ghost. The thought of using a chicken from your hatchery and dropping it on them to heal them isn't something that's intuitive like the heal spell is. So again, unless someone tells you, you're unlikely to think, oh, chickens, food, maybe that heals enemy. It's not a mechanic that's normally used in other games. It's not something that's immediately obvious or intuitive at all. And while it's great to add to the game without anything to inform the player of that, it is a major weakness of it, because it can really be infuriating for new players sometimes to be stuck at something and have no clue what's going on just because this mechanic or idea or concept is not put across to them at all.
Yeah, the missing tutorial, or well, yeah, there is no real tutorial. You have missions which explain a little bit, but yeah, it's missing. You could say that really. And another problem I have with the game is sometimes the controls are a little bit clunky, especially if you want to heal exactly that unit or grab that unit. It's sometimes really hard and frustrating.
And on top, getting all of them. Newer games like Dungeons have seen this problem, and there's a shortcut where you can grab all your units and you can drop them all at once. This isn't working in Dungeon Keeper. You always can take up to 8 units, and that's about it. And if you are really trying to get all your units at a certain spot, it takes time.
Yeah,
and the AI can do it instantly.
Yeah.
Also, one thing I hate is that you can dig up as many fields as you want, but you can't select the entire room, for example, and it's built. You have to select one tile after another one, and then it's built. It's so frustrating.
That's really missing, but this is something newer games also fixed: rectangle digging or rectangle building.
Yeah, it's just odd that they included it in the digging process, but not in the building process. So it's not so much brain power to extrapolate the next step, I would say.
That's what I meant. Imagine they had another 1.5 years.
Yeah.
I believe a lot of the modern features that in modern remakes are being utilized would have come up, but it just didn't have the time, I suppose.
Yeah, so some of these things they did address in Dungeon Keeper 2. So you can hold as many creatures as you want in your hand in Dungeon Keeper 2. And you have one-click building. However, this is the advantage of the Keeper FX mod. So the devs are still working on it. And the current version of the mod is 0.4.8. However, there is a alpha available for 0.4.9. And that actually, one of the features that includes is a one-click build feature, which I know it was something I've been wanting. Like, one of the things I wanted more than anything in Dungeon Keeper 1 was a one-click build. When you're building a 50x50 workshop, building each tile by hand is just, it's such a nightmare.
Yeah.
It was definitely a major failing of the game. But as I said, it's something that's built into Keeper FX on the alpha version, and so people can play it on there. And when they finish working on the alpha, it will be released in the new latest version. With the whole picking up of creatures, I can totally get it. Like, managing creatures is really hard in this game. But again, you've got tools like Hold Audience and CTA or Call to Arms, stuff like that, which when you start using suddenly makes your life 1,000 times easier. But again, it comes back to the thing of the game does not push you to use these. It does not make it obvious. For a long time, before I started streaming, I never really used Call to Arms. I never really used Hold Audience or anything like that. And since people have pushed me to start using those, suddenly I've got so much better at like managing my creatures. So like, it's not that the game doesn't have mechanics to handle these, it's just that it doesn't tell you about them, which is, as I said before, a real fall short. Although the whole only holding 8 creatures in your hand is definitely a major con, that would be something actually that I might talk to the devs later on about. I think some of them are watching now. Being able to hold more than 8 creatures in your hand would be a massive bonus. It was something that was available in Dungeon Keeper 2, and I would love to see it in Keeper FX if it ever was able to become a thing.
Again, it's like with the pros, I have a lot of smaller cons. One of the things that really annoyed me was the bad network implementation. As I described, when we were playing this on LAN, we were 4 guys out of 4, and the game was so damn slow that you really didn't want to play it. And on top, why only IPX? I mean, when the game came out, 1997, TCP/IP wasn't exactly new, so why stick with IPX? It was a lazy move, so to say, and in this case, badly executed. I mean, the network game simply really didn't work out. I mean, there are also versions where the network game actually didn't find any games. I know specifically that back then there was a fixed file for this problem, and all of a sudden your IPX network game was working. So a network game that doesn't work at all doesn't really hit it.
That would definitely be personally my biggest con for the game. Like, I do have a couple of other cons for it, but the failing on the multiplayer side, I've spoke to some of the devs. Apparently the core game engine as it was originally designed was not well built for multiplayer. There was a lot of optimization issues, as I've said, but the fact that they used a older network connection, even for its time and stuff like that, was a real downside. It is something that hopefully will be fixed in newer versions of KeeperFX, and that would be amazing to see. That would be the one thing that I would love to see above all else now. But definitely for the game's release, that would probably the biggest disappointment. If I was the same age I am now, back when the game's released, that would have been the biggest disappointment to me at the time. The fact that there's no good multiplayer. It's just for a game that's got so much in it, it's just a bit of a shame that it doesn't have a good native multiplayer in it.
Yeah, and on top there are minor problems with the single player. In my personal opinion, this single player was a little bit too scripted, if you know what I mean. I mean, the entire missions are scripted, obvious in some way, but sometimes it was really, really crazy that you knew exactly by this time a bunch of heroes is coming out, or if you have a certain situation, you can prolong it as long as you want to, up to the point where you are strong enough, and it was really like a programmed situation. I mean, there are a lot of games who are doing it like that, but I always feel it's a little bit too obvious, especially when you can simply play the very same mission the very same time every time, and you always succeed or you always fail. It removes the surprise factor, so to say. There are, of course, some minor technical problems, like I believe even back then higher resolutions would have been available. This would have been really nice, but I suppose that this has to do with the technology they use. Maybe they used sprites that wouldn't look that well because you cannot really scale them or something like that. Of course, already mentioned filling up parts of the map. This is what newer games or variations of this game do. As I said, there are certain situations where you really, really have to be careful what you're doing, especially when it comes to digging around. And there are certain missions where you already have lost the missions if you just dig a line too long and you don't know it. There's no way you will ever gonna get this hole closed, so you're finished, you're done. And as you said, this would probably have been part of a more enhanced version with more time or something like that, but it's kind of the obvious next step. You can dig holes, and of course you can fill those holes once again. I mean, of course I wasn't in the situation, but for me this would be a no-brainer. And yeah, I really miss that feature. And in newer games where you can use it, it really shows how much worth that actually has. And game mechanically, well, you cannot really choose what to produce. I mean, yeah, there's a certain cycle when a certain door or trap is being built, and you have a small influence by actually using your traps, placing doors, but it would have been a lot more fun, or it would have been a lot more efficient if you could pick which kind of item your troops should produce. I mean, if they're idle and they're just producing whatever they want, that's okay. But if you really, really need that magic door and you're just not getting it because it tries to build 5 wooden doors first, then, well, this really bugs you after a time.
The workshop could definitely have been a little bit different. There are ways you can manipulate it into manufacturing what you want, but it is a little bit awkward and it's not ideal. So the way the workshop works is that it will manufacture whatever trap or door you have the least of, and if you've got 2 items that you've got the same number of, it will manufacture whichever has the lowest manufacture cost. So this does mean that you can get it to focus on manufacturing one thing. If you let it fill itself up and then you only place this one thing, it will keep making, say, boulder traps to get that up to the same amount as everything else. But that's really awkward because that means you've got to let them make everything else. And as you say, if you just need that one magic door, but you're stuck waiting because they're making a gas trap of all things, it can be a real pain in the backside. You could say it's a bit of a balance mechanic to stop the workshop being too powerful, but at the same time, I would agree with you. I would have liked to have seen something where you can choose what they're manufacturing. It would definitely have added to a workshop's appealability, I think.
Yeah. And very similar it is with the map possession. Every tile that your imps can walk on can be in your possession, which also goes for rooms. For rooms, they have implemented that mechanic that you can take over an entire room at once. It takes a little longer to overtake, but after a few seconds, you will have the entire room. And this really, I believe, is a little bit too fine, in my opinion, for the non-room tiles, so only floor. Especially when you have an imp running around and trying to overtake an entire area, it will randomly do stuff, and at times this really is a problem that you cannot take a certain area in a certain time because it just runs around there in a random fashion, and if push comes to shove, it will simply go somewhere else and leave taking over this area altogether. And the only thing you can do is take the next imp, place it there once again. I believe this map possession could have been a little less detailed, a little less fine, that you can say you have certain areas which have maybe, let's say, 3x3 or something like that, which you take over all at once or something like that.
Yeah, that would be another thing. Imps, they've all got their own tasks, which is fair enough, and some tasks take priority. And for the most part, the system is good, but as you say, you'll have times where you'll have your hand full of 8 imps and you'll drop them all down, and 6 of them will bugger off somewhere else on the map to do something completely unrelated to what you want to do. And
especially if it is on the other end of the map, that's a really annoying part.
Yeah, when only 2 are left to do this task and you're really pressured on time to get this bit done, you can possess an imp to control it, and that will let you claim unclaimed floor. But annoyingly, you cannot claim claimed floor or rooms while possessed as an imp, which is kind of frustrating. I'm not sure if there is a reason for that, if it was something that was going to be implemented but never was, if it was just never thought of or what. But while it's nice you can control an imp to go claim something that's not claimed, if it's a room or is already claimed, you've just got to drop an imp and wait for that imp to decide, yep, no, I'm going to go do that, instead of running to the opposite end of the map to pick up, oh, there's this random dead fly on the floor I'm going to go grab instead.
Exactly like that. Sometimes you really think, what's the priority behind it? Because I've never really gotten around noticing that. I mean, taking gold is not always a priority. Transporting gold also isn't always a priority, but there are times when they do nothing except that. I never gotten around understanding how they prioritize what they are doing.
I think I have a vague idea of how it works, partly because at one point as a fun project I tried to recreate Dungeon Keeper in the Unity engine. Some tasks like mining walls are high priority, gold walls are a higher priority than normal dirt walls, but other tasks such as reinforcing walls are quite a low priority. But even so, as you say, you'll have times when you'll drop an imp and you'll think, okay, that task is priority, and then they'll go do something else. And the only reason that I can think of for that being the case is that, say that you've got a bit of gold that you want the imp to go pick up, and it goes do something else. The only reason I can think of that being a case is that one of the other imps somewhere else in the dungeon is already tasked to picking up that gold, which is why the imp you dropped has gone off to do something else. I don't know if that's accurate. Certainly when I tried to recreate Dungeon Keeper, that was how my system worked. But the actual reason for Dungeon Keeper could be that, or it could be something else. Whatever the reason is, it can be really frustrating at times when you've got dozens and dozens of imps and you just want to try and claim this one area and they're buggering off elsewhere. It is one of the more frustrating aspects to a game.
And then the last one, then I believe I'm finished. It's more of a game mechanics aspect. I'm not sure, one might disagree with that one. You know, every map has a unit pool where you can gain units from. It's not like you can gain whatever unit that is possible in the game. It's actually part of what is set for this map.
Yeah.
But you also have a unit pool for all players. So this means if one, for example, has all those wizards somehow, then you won't get any. And I believe this is not really a wise choice, because there are situations where this really gets you into a very, very hard position, and there's nothing you can do about it, except for confronting your opponent, which may be the very same thing you're trying to avoid, because, well, you don't have this unit that would solve your problem.
Yeah, it definitely becomes a tactical problem at that point. There are one or two things you can do about it, such as the scavenger room. If you've got at least a warlock, you might be able to like try and scavenge some others or something like that.
Yeah.
But as you say, if you're late into a game and the other person's already claimed all army of one type of unit, it can be pretty difficult. You can try and counter it, so all creatures have some unit that they're weaker against. For example, Bile Demons with their gas. Fairies from the hero side are actually immune to the gas. But obviously, you can't normally attract fairies very easily. It's like, can you get the creature to counter that unit? Is there any left in that creature pool? It is a unique way of doing it, and it is a pretty interesting idea, but it is one that does have its flaws. I personally like it, but it is certainly not a system without issues.
There's one mission where this really gets evident for everyone. There's one mission where you can have skeletons, but don't bother. You won't keep them. The other guy already has 20 or something like that, and he just uses the attraction mechanism, and you simply won't keep them. You can't pull it off to keep one skeleton. There's no way you can have them. Even if you kill all your opponents via the jail, let them starve to death and get your skeletons, there's no point. They will be vanished within minutes. There's nothing you can do about it. Nothing.
I'm not sure which level that is. I know on the final level of the classic campaign that is definitely the case with vampires. It might be the case on level 19 and the level before the last level with skeletons, which wouldn't surprise me. You can counter that. So if you put a skeleton in the temple, then that one skeleton and two others are immune to scavenging. But certainly it can be really frustrating, because if you've not been very lucky and you've not got any creatures that will research very quickly, then suddenly you've not got your counter to that. Or if for whatever reason you don't have the gold to build a temple or anything like that. The scavenging room is one of the more frustrating rooms, because you can end up in a position, and I've ended up in this with an AI before on the last level of the classic campaign, where you just try and scavenge each other's creatures constantly, and it just becomes a scavenger battle. Who's got the most creatures in the scavenger room? Who's got the biggest scavenger room? Who's got the most efficient scavenger room? It is like, there are things you can do to avoid it, but it is a trap that's pretty easy to fall into, and it does become incredibly frustrating, I would say.
Yeah, especially if it
certainly-
happens right from the start.
Yeah.
It's the mission, the one I was talking about is the one where you have already a whole lot of rooms that you just have to break down the doors and take over. Where you have on the lower right-hand side, you have the 4 gems, and all surrounded by indestructible walls and a lot of water.
Yeah, so that's level 19 then. So yeah, I don't think I've ever actually played that level using mainly skeletons, or I might have, I'm just not remembering it. But it certainly wouldn't surprise me. I know that the enemy keeper does like to focus quite heavily on skeletons there. So yeah, it would be, all it requires is for him to build a massive scavenger room, throw his skeletons in there, and bang, suddenly all your skeletons are just disappearing off to his dungeon instead.
That's pretty much what's happening. You have the problem that you need some time to build a sizable and powerful force to go out and take those heroes. And by the time you are strong enough for that, getting your heroes, therefore getting your skeletons eventually, it's too late. I don't know how the guy does that, how the map actually is designed. I never looked into that. But at some point, you're simply lost. There's nothing you can do about it. There's no way of shielding yourself from scavenger room. It would, for example, be an interesting spell. Cast a spell that blocks enemy scavenger room.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if the slave spell does that.
No, the slave spell doesn't. Like I said, you can put creatures in the temple, and like I said, if you have one creature in the temple, then that creature and two other creatures of its type will no longer be scavengeable. So that's how you defend against scavenging, but it does become really awkward when you suddenly have to have a third of your creatures in the temple.
Yeah.
For that level, there are a few ways you can tackle it. One way that I used to love as a kid, even though it's not an ideal way, is I would just make tons and tons of traps and kill the heroes that way, and then let the other keeper kill his units on the traps. And the way we do it when we're speedrunning is that you can actually get the heroes to go attack the other keeper right from the get-go. If you speedrun that level, you can actually do it within 2 minutes. But again, that's one of those things where unless you do things in a very specific order, it's all going to go to hell very quickly for you. It is another one of those levels where, again, if you're not sure on the mechanics or whatever, you can get stuck very easily. I think the way you're meant to do it is actually converting the heroes you capture. So you torture them and you heal them up so they join your side instead of turning into skeletons. But I would have to double check that one. I think that was the way you were meant to do it, though.
I always try and go for hornies, actually.
Oh,
they do the job as well.
So much fun.
As long as they're not turning nuts, of course. But as you said, if you know what you are supposed to do with them, then it's quite alright.
It is. But once a horny's gone nuts on you, it's like, well, might as well just watch him slaughter all your minions by that point.
This is something I just learned a few days ago. I was never sure of it, but looking back, yeah, of course, there are two situations. You have him going angry, which is okay. And then you have the situation where he actually really gets nuts and there's nothing you can do about it. You can only throw him out of your dungeon and there's nothing you can do about it. This is something I just learned a few days ago, and all of a sudden it gets really obvious. Yeah, of course, I've seen this a few times where you can really do whatever you want. He will not back down. He won't do it. Most of the time, no problem, but there's a no return point.
Yeah, so with most creatures, as I said, you can throw them in the temple and they'll calm down, or you can get gold from your gold room and drop it on them. That'll normally cheer them up. With the Reaper, it works for a while, but as you say, when you hit a point of no return, that's it. That guy goes berserk, and the last thing you want is a level 10 Reaper running rampant through your dungeon, because whereas other creatures will normally only go and attack a single room, or they'll have one certain other type of creature they don't like and go fight, Horny just goes nuts and just attacks everything on sight. It's hilarious, but it's also really infuriating when you've just got this one dude running around your dungeon slicing everything to pieces.
Especially when you see this for the first time. I mean, you know he has a temper, okay. But when you suddenly realize you can throw in all your money, he won't back down. You can throw him into the temple as much as you like, won't change a damn thing. When you have seen this the first time, things are really getting scary.
Yeah. Because suddenly you've got this one rogue unit who is the most powerful unit you've got, and there's nothing you can do to stop him. It is almost intimidating in a way. It's hilarious, but yeah, it is intimidating, I would say.
Being at this very unique item of the game. Another thing I would say is it's so rare back then and now, I would say, that you are evil. It's so a rarely played element in games. I like it. I really like it.
I believe they all started this kind of game. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm having a big mouth here, but I believe they were the first who actually really pushed the issue, because there are other games like Evil Genius or the Dungeon series from today, but all of them actually go back to that game, I believe.
Yeah, I also think it's more or less the origin of the evil root. In games, at least.
And yeah, of course, it's simply something different for a change. We have discussed this a whole lot of times that the gaming industry has a habit of just redoing what used to work or works. And this was really new and brought something new to the entire idea of gaming, just doing it the other way around for a change.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with a lot of games that kind of becoming stale in a way. A lot of games do tend to stick with one formula, and it's like, yeah, it works, and it's like, yeah, it makes you money, but it makes them all feel quite samey. Whereas this is unique. You're playing from the evil perspective. Like you guys, I can't think of many other games where you play from the evil side. And also, as I said earlier, with it being a godlike, there aren't many godlike titles out there. So with you playing on the evil side, it being a godlike, it's a very unique game combined with its charm. It just stands out. I would love to see more games like it out today. It's a bit of a shame that there aren't, but I'm not really sure how that issue can be fixed, to be honest.
This is something I was also thinking about a lot because I also played Dungeons 2 and 3, and they are okay. You know, it's not like I say, well, those games are crap or something. That's not true. But maybe it's just nostalgia or something like that. But I always think they're not getting it right somehow. If you look at Dungeon Keeper, they do it simply better in many aspects, although those games are pretty similar. So it's not like, well, it's strangely similar or something, but if you look at the game mechanics and what they are doing, then you can clearly see it is entirely derived from Dungeon Keeper. They don't try to hide it at all. They are well aware of that, and they don't try to fool you with that, but somehow they don't really get it right. For example, in Dungeon 3, the narrator, the guy who talks to you, he's so flat funny. Not really funny, but in a clumsy way, so to say, I believe. It's a little bit over the top, and this is what Dungeon Keeper does right. It tries to be funny, obviously, but not in a clumsy way. I'm not quite sure why that is, actually. I mean, they have a really good example how to do it. And of course, they couldn't just go and just copy the game, of course. But, well, if you know what you can do right, maybe you can change it a little bit and then maybe improve upon it. As I said, filling up holes really changes the game experience, stuff like that. And yeah, I'm not sure, but because modern games have seen this game, of course. They are building up on the development those games started, and somehow still it isn't getting any better. That's the strange part. You have better graphics, you have a lot of time to think about new game mechanics, new aspects, which they do add, but somehow, maybe it's just me, but somehow they aren't getting better. They are getting different, but not better.
Agree with you, to be honest. Like, technically, they're getting better graphics, higher frame rates, more mechanics and such like that. But they lack a charm. They lack a sort of relatability. I personally feel like games kind of lost their soul a little bit. A lot, like, I play a few different retro games, and they all kind of have a certain charm or a soul about them, like almost like a real passion to them that just doesn't feel like is there in more modern titles. You do get some which still feel pretty good to like play or to see, but for the most part, it is pretty lacking. I think one example of a game that does do it a little better, there's a game called War for the Overworld, and quite a few people refer to that as a sort of spiritual successor to Dungeon Keeper because it uses a lot of the same ideas. I like that idea because it does kind of build on Dungeon Keeper a little bit. It's not perfect by any means, but it certainly does it a lot better than like other modern titles, which either try too hard with the humor or just become too cheesy, or they try and take it so utterly serious that you can't take it seriously. So yeah, I would really agree with that. That a lot of modern games just feel like they're missing that sort of connection to the players.
This is what I find so interesting. I'm not sure if this is just me because I've seen it for such a long time and I'm just used to it. Maybe someone who starts with Dungeon 3, for example, would think the exact other way around. He likes Dungeon 3, and when he has a look at Dungeon Keeper, he would feel similarly, but I'm not sure. I really can't say, but as you said, this also goes for other games where you think you can't put your finger on it, but you described it as lost their soul, and I know what you mean. I wouldn't use the exact words, but I know what you mean.
Continue a little bit with the unique aspect. I would say that this game is also amazing with, well, the end game basically that is out of your control. For example, the Armageddon spell is... I can't think of any game which includes elements which will bite you in the ass.
Oh, yeah.
So really amazing stuff.
Well, that's a funny thing. This spell is meant to be used when you know you will be winning.
That's true. It's a battle royale where you know you have the upper hand.
Yeah, and of course, if you're making a mistake, then, well, that's the name, Armageddon. You're done.
Yeah, that's a make or break spell. Like you use it when so you can see how many creatures your opponents have when you play against other keepers, and you use it when you know you can win. But it's really appropriately named because obviously when you use it, all the creatures on the map spawn at your heart. So if you don't win that fight, then you're not winning any more fights. And it is absolutely hilarious to see just this one small room around your heart with 60, 70 creatures just launching who knows what abilities at each other. It's one of those things where it only lasts for about 20 seconds, but it's about 20 seconds of pure glorious like particle effects on screen where you just don't know what's happening.
And the nuts part about it is the engine really handles it well. As you say, there are 70 creatures at a rather narrow spot, and it still works.
It definitely handles it better in Keeper FX with the optimizations, but even so, when you think about the AI tasking in the game, programmers will probably understand this a little bit more, but when it comes to AI is actually really intensive for computers to run, and a lot of modern games actually take shortcuts and that to try and avoid some of the AI overhead. But this game, when you think about all the complexities, like the imps alone, all the tasks they're doing, how they're being assigned the tasks that have already been assigned to certain imps and have been completed, it's really quite impressive how well it all works, even in the base game with how laggy it can be at times. To be able to run it on the older hardware in any sort of playable frame rate is really quite impressive.
Yeah, that's really true. I can't remember any lagginess back then when I played it in 1997. Now, of course, yeah, with newer hardware, it's sometimes difficult to play those older games, but back then, no, there wasn't any, I would remember at least. Also, a thing which can bite you in the ass, often it's very helpful to slap your units, which is also unique. I only know of Dungeon Keeper who lets you do that.
Black and White, I believe. Black and White did it too.
But doing the mistake that you slapped Horny, well, that's the last mistake you did.
Not necessarily. That's the funny part. You can get around, but if you wait too long or overdo it, then you're finished.
That's true, yeah. Also being at the subject of Horny and the Dark Mistresses were basically, well, they came up with that idea from fetish magazines, at least Dean Carter told me.
As I said, as an adult, you know exactly where they are pointing to. As a child, you don't really necessarily recognize it. And if you come to think about the cinematics of the very last mission, then you definitely know that this game is not just supposed for children. For children, probably it's a funny situation, but when you come to think of what they are showing you, it's actually not funny at all.
Yeah, the things shown in the game, I would definitely not say it's aimed at kids. Like, you play the first few levels of a classic campaign, it's like, okay, it's a bit gory, but nothing big. And then you get to later on, you've got, like, mistresses being whipped in the torture chamber.
Yeah.
Like, when you actually stop to think about that, it is like, hang on, this was meant for 12-year-olds at the time? Yeah, like, that would not fly by today's standards.
Well, if you compare it to The Simpsons, Itchy and Scratchy is also very brutal. And I don't know the rating from The Simpsons in Germany or Austria, but, well, I couldn't imagine this today. But it's still on the air.
It does kind of like surprise you. It's kind of amusing in a way. So there's one person who I know who I won't name. He has actually said to me before now, as a kid, he didn't understand why he liked the torture chamber and the mistresses. And 20 years later, he knows why he liked the torture chamber and the mistresses. So
Pretty
it
much
does-
like that, yes.
Yeah. Make of that what you will about the game, but I think it kind of says a lot in some ways.
Yeah, and I just looked it up. In Germany, it was meant for 12 years and above. So, yeah, 12 years, of course. And, well, two other things that are unique for me is you can manually crack that thing. If you know what you're doing, then you can make the game run from your hard drive without having to insert a CD. There's nothing to it, actually, if you know what you are required to do. Everybody could do that. It was the first experience I ever had with, well, getting a game to run without CD, without needing any additional tools, so to say. And the last mission can be really, really funny. It depends if you're lucky or not. If you hit it off to capture the avatar, this can get really, really funny, because then if you know the game, you know that the avatar is being revived and returns a second time to your dungeon. And then you can have the avatar fighting the avatar on top of your other creatures. And as the avatar is the strongest unit, besides the horny, this can really be funny. But I never really found a way to actively reproduce that, because the avatar is being held in a prison, and this prison is surrounded by lava, and there's only one way to push him out. This is with this explosion cast that, for example, the dragon has. And I've never gotten around into doing this on purpose, getting him over the lava so that he walks away the other side, not back to the prison cell. But this can happen all by itself, and all of a sudden you have the avatar fighting the avatar.
Yeah, another cool thing you can do at the end of the last level is if you capture the avatar instead of killing him, I believe there's a separate cinematic for the end of the game if he's captured, not killed. You get to see, I believe it's the knight dragged off by an imp to a torture chamber, and you can just hear screams in the background as a door swings open to the imp dragging him through. It's only like a 5-second clip, but it's really hilarious to see just as you complete this final level of the game.
And especially this goes also for the other missions, for all missions when you have the knight, the hero, the main hero, captured, then you get also a torture room where you have certain doors, and if you click at them, you hear the sounds. You don't see anything, but you hear the sounds. This happens when you capture the final knight of each level. If you don't kill him, if you convert him to one of your own, then, or I believe, yeah, you have to capture him, not just throw him into the prison cell. You will have to capture him, and then you can, after the mission, go to a room where you can kind of click and torture him.
How it should be.
Yeah, but again, it's those small things where you think this wouldn't have been necessary, but they did it.
Yeah, it's the amount of detail is crazy in this game. Two things I have on my list, I'm not entirely sure if it's completely unique or they were the first who did it. Direct control of units, was it unique?
The possession?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think it's pretty unique for the time. I can't think of any other games that would have done it, but I'm not that familiar with other godlikes from the time or that many RTSs, other than things like Age of Empires maybe. So I think it's pretty unique, but I could not be 100% on that.
The closest thing I have in mind is Uprising, where you cannot control a unit, but you can see the world from its perspective. For example, if you point your crosshair to an AAV and press the K button, then all of a sudden you see the world from its camera angle. But it's not really control, but as I said, it's the closest thing I know to that.
Another thing would be, for me at least, I can't think of a game, the in-game AI who helps you. You have 3 different levels of help from the AI, and yeah, I rarely use it, but I like it, that it's at least there.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a love-hate, because yeah, the idea in principle would be nice, but I believe most players simply turn it off because usually it just messes things up. But the basic concept would be okay.
And do you think there's another game who does it? Maybe some 4X games, but in the RTS genre, no.
There are only other mechanics which help you to manage, like in Supreme Commander, where you can have an infinite build which points to a rally point of your dropship, which then transports your unit somewhere. things like that, but not really an AI that kind of autonomously does things. At least I don't know of any.
Also, if you think about the other SimCity-like games, there isn't anything which comes up to mind.
I'm pretty sure that is a very unique mechanic. Unfortunately, I've never had good experiences with it myself. I do think most people turn it off as it tends to go off on a real tangent. I would love to know what it's trying to do sometimes when you do use it. But the idea of it is really cool if the implementation isn't really that effective.
I think the main problem with that feature is, as I said, there are certain situations where you really have to be careful where you are building, and of course the AI doesn't give a shit about it, which can really get you in trouble. This is pretty much why I always turned it off, because it is not worth the effort.
Yeah.
Good, I would think we skip the part about what a sequel could do better, because we mentioned already, I would say, everything.
Well, I believe the standing order, of course.
Yeah, do it better, better tutorial, better controls. Is there anything which came to your mind which is so important that a new title should have?
I don't know. I think it would be nice if there was like more cool cinematics. Obviously, we are 20 odd years later, nearly 25 odd years later. So it'd be nice if we could use all the tools available now to add like more cinematics, maybe more music variations, stuff like that.
Yeah, just use the tools from today, basically.
Yeah, outside that, it's hard to say. Obviously, as I said earlier, the devs are still working on it and they keep adding new features and that to it. So I think if there was anything major, it would just be to not necessarily update the graphics or anything, as I like the unique styling. I think it suits the charm. But certainly just try and modernize a lot of the background processes, a lot of the game engine, just to make it easier for things like the multiplayer to get working, to make community modding that little bit easier, stuff like that.
Well then, let's go to what special memories do you have? I have two. First one is during school time, during my free periods, I sneaked sometimes with a few friends in the computer room and played for hours this game. And there I preferred to play way too long in the first person view, and as you mentioned, played it as a first person shooter.
Oh, that sounds like an amazing memory, that does.
Oh yes, it was. Sometimes we got caught.
But it still was worth it.
Oh yes.
Did the teachers join in?
Yeah.
They were too old.
Today they might.
Especially if you show them the Dark Mistress.
Yeah, I could see that. For me, I would say one really cool memory would be when I first completed it. I got stuck on the last level for a good couple of weeks before I finally did it, and I still hold a very clear image of my head of the long trail of traps I had that all the heroes wandered through. I spent over an hour trying to just manufacture traps. That would be my coolest memory, I would say.
Well, in my case, actually, it is what you described earlier. This feeling of helplessness when it comes to what am I supposed to do here. The very beginning, as I described when I got the game the first time, where I wasn't really sure what I was supposed to do here. It's a strange sensation. Usually you at least know what you are supposed to do, but you don't know how, or something like that. But in this case, it was really confusing. You can control units, okay, what's the point? You can mark parts of the map, what's the point of it? And later on, it continued with certain map elements. I never understood it in the beginning. Why are those purple gold fields not being reduced? What's going on? Because you have no description whatsoever what is going on. And this feeling of confusion. This really is something unique. I believe I never had that with another game. I mean, obviously I managed at some point, but this I never had with any other game where you think, I have no clue what this means.
I can see that. Honestly, it fits the game really well, I think. Just a learning process. And even when you've been playing for ages, there's still stuff to learn. It's definitely a real treat for this game to have.
But the good thing here is, years later, you can still enjoy it and learn more things.
Yeah, you can play this up and down, back and forth, and it still is a nice experience.
Completely, yeah. So much fun. You can just keep coming back to it.
Since we are coming close to the 2-hour mark again, we should really try not to do that in future videos. The last thing would be hidden features. I think there are way too many to list them all. I just mention a few, which I really like from the wiki. For example, that crazy idea that sadly they didn't include it, I have to be honest, but it was original there, that if you have a printer connected to your computer and played a certain level, that the enemy keeper would fax you some messages via the printer.
Yeah, that's a really cool thing. I remember one of the devs telling me about that. That was actually in the game. That was actually in the alpha. But from what I'm told, that actually got removed because someone played it in an office building where there was a lot of printers all over the building. So as far as everyone else could see, they thought they were like getting threats from this random hacker who hacked into the network. And no, it was just someone playing the alpha version of Dungeon Keeper. I don't know how true that is, but supposedly that happened.
It would figure, yeah.
It's so amazing. It's so amazing.
It really is. That would have been an absolutely beautiful thing to have. Another really cool hidden feature that not many people know about, in the classic campaign, when you go to the levels menu, if you open the level menu on a night of a full moon, you get a bonus level which you can only play on the day of a full moon.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that also.
Although I never got around in how I am supposed to win that one.
I've got to be honest, I've yet to play it. I need to go back and play that one because I only learned of it a while ago.
Yeah, but you have played it long enough, or at least enough days in a row, then you will stumble upon that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Also quite nice is that on certain days you will get basically a birthday message from the developers. There's a list on the wiki where you just have to change your computer time to that date, and yeah, you can read it. I also read in the chat, if you play the Keeper FX, there is also a special cinematics on New Moon.
I'm not sure if this also goes for the English version, but I suppose so. I experienced that myself. There are some sounds in the game that don't always happen. I only know the German translation, so I'm not sure if this is accurate in English, where it says something like, your trouser is open, or something smells funny. And that doesn't always happen. I don't have any idea when this actually happens or what the cause of it is. But when you try to extract the audio files from the game, then there are a lot of them, 5 or 6 or something like that, which obviously are not meant for the general normal game. But they happen. I've experienced this myself, where it's said to me, your trousers are open.
So that's basically like random messages happen occasionally, which is really cool, but it happens really rarely. So like, I think you've got to be playing for like X amount of time. I'm not sure how long it is for it to happen. So you very rarely hear it, and most of the time when it does happen, you've no clue it has happened. It just catches you off guard. Again, it's one of those features. It's really nice to have, but when it happens, you don't know what it is because it just rarely happens.
Yeah, this was pretty much what happened to me. The only difference is I knew I had heard the sound before because I was extracting the file, so I wasn't totally surprised. But you have no idea how to reproduce it, and I really played this game for a whole lot of time, and I only experienced this once. So yeah, it is really rare, and for a novice player who has never heard this, will probably be a little bit startling.
A little bit, yeah. The only time I can think of where I've had this was in one of the custom campaigns. I heard a sneeze sound. It was really well timed because everything had just gone quiet and there was this sneeze sound, and it just completely caught me off by guard. And like you, I've got hundreds of hours in this game at this point, and still had never heard of this before, so it can be a little bit startling.
Okay, I would say this is the part of the video where we open the mic to you. Are there any topics we missed? Anything you would like to add?
I probably should have seen that one coming, now that I think about it. Not particularly. We've spoke about the game in pretty great deal. We've spoke about the community, the mod, the base game itself, its history. We could talk for ages about all the like hidden features and the mechanics and such like that. I think we've got most of the important stuff. Yeah, I think we've covered everything, to be fair.
That's true. That's really true. So Turan, we learned a lot today, I would say.
Yeah, but still, as we discussed, this game still surprises you even today, after playing for 20 years or so.
Well, I would say that's it for this review. Leave us a comment, tell us what you think about the game, and of course, play the game. Until next time.
Bye-bye.
See ya.